by any means necessary.
And we're going to keep the movement moving on, as they say, with our weekly edition of the Red Spin Report, where we discuss sports, politics, and struggle with Nate Wallace, co-host of the Red Spin Sports Podcast. Nate, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Sean, glad to be here.
Absolutely. And, Nate, it continues to be interesting to watch how organized sports at different levels continues to twist and contort itself to adjust to the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, here most recently, the University of Mexico is reportedly paying $70,000 a week to keep its entire football team in a hotel in Las Vegas when I believe a positive COVID-19 test prevented them from playing at home. Could you break down what's really happening there with the University of New Mexico and what could, be motivating them to spend this much money?
Yeah, so I mean, basically there was a situation where the governor is at odds with the athletic director and with the coach of the football program. Like you said, they're paying $70,000 a week to keep their program in Las Vegas. The state is just taking a more cautious approach than other states have too. They have had positive tests, but still have other states, and they still have allowed college football to go on. The reality is that it just shows that despite we see the money that's being spent, $70,000 a week, and they're not even in a Power 5 conference. And by Power 5, I mean the 5 conferences that make up, or kind of the main ones that make up the college football playoff primarily, and they play out west, and they're and so eventually it just shows you more. Yet another example of how the TV money is so critical to these athletic department budgets. These athletic departments absolutely rely on the football TV money. I mean, it's just like an absolute pacifier for them. It's become such a bloated thing, and that we built up just a normalized reality where athletic departments are essentially financing all their other expenditures off of the money they're bringing in from the big revenue sports. And to think that they're spending that much, we know they clearly would not be doing if it weren't for the fact they were going to make a profit, or they were going to lose a lot more if they did not. It just reveals yet again just how much the coronavirus pandemic has ripped the mask off the idea of amateurism and the farce that is. Just being out in Vegas, also the idea of student athletes. I mean, the idea of being in a hotel, the idea that they're primarily there to be an education. That's the thing that's promoted, right, as the reason for the inability to compensate student athletes or athletic laborers. And but yet they're doing virtual learning in a hotel room in Vegas. And I guess they would argue that a lot of people are doing virtual learning these days, but it's just it seems bizarre, and especially as we have this spate of new tests and new cancellations in games all over the country. It is really problematic, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, the new cancellations, Nate, is definitely in response to the astronomical rise in COVID cases across the country that's at this point just completely uncontrolled. And it's really disheartening to see schools respond this way, where they're, focusing more on their bottom line than on their students' health. But as disheartening as it is, it's not really surprising because, we do live in this extremely hyper-capitalist country, and all of this is going on as this government, both Democrat and Republicans in the government, continues the attacks on China and continues to ramp up this new Cold War. And it, bleeds over into the sports arena, even as there is this incredible popularity of basketball in the People's Republic of China. So I'm wondering how that is kind of, those things are kind of juxtaposing in China with the popularity of American basketball players there, and the way the United States government, at least, is attacking China for their responsibility in the spread of the coronavirus, and how that's playing in China as people are enjoying the sport and the sports figures.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's a few things that hit on. I mean, I think it's hard to understate the impact Yao Ming has, going back, it's been a while now, probably 20 years, and his coming over to the U.S. and playing for the Houston Rockets, a little less than 20 years, but, almost. And he was a 7'6" center, came from China, and really, I think, accelerated that growth. You're seeing, so many NBA stars have gone over there and realized, it's to themselves that the propaganda isn't what it seems. I mean, Danny Haiphong and I've talked about this a number of times, and he was on did a recent live stream talking about just, Beijing especially is just a mecca of basketball culture. And as we have so many of these people in Washington that are constantly sitting there in these little think tanks and strategizing ways to try to use corporate media to, as they always ironically say, the left and independent progressive media is doing, divide Americans. Well, they want to divide people in the world into, Cold War camps that really escalate with all the other threats we have around the world. The threat of just annihilation and just all sorts of other dangers short of that, for the benefit of the military-industrial complex here. But we see an example of Stephon Marbury, for example, and just to contrast what he describes being in China was like in early 2020 with what we see in the U.S., I think it's useful here. I mean, he talks about, having gone home in January, returned to China in March. He's coaching now. He's retired since 2018, playing basketball himself. And I had a good first season. They went 19-11 as a coach. There's actually a documentary about his life called A Kid from Coney Island that is out now. But he said that when I first got here, I'm quoting about life in Beijing, I went to get a COVID-19 test on my own. I went through all the procedures, waited 5 hours to get my results back, which were negative. Went home thinking I'd be able to get back out. But it was 12 hours before they passed anyone, comes to China, you have a 14-day quarantine. So he basically talks about that the government actually makes it easy for people. That there's an app they have that you can check your temperature, that, when you feel, fatigue, there's different symptoms. He says, people wearing masks is just the norm. I mean, and there's no discussion about politicizing of that. He says, there's so much misunderstanding. And I just think that if anything that can be really good about sports amid all the negativity and the exploitation of the capitalist sport, it says another guy too. You have people like Allen Iverson that go over there and realize, he says, that basketball is beloved by a lot of people. And I think my relationship with Chinese fans is the fact that people here really love and respect people that are authentic, people that are not scared to be themselves. And I think they respect people that are human and act like they're human. And, so you have Iverson, you have Marbury, there's a museum for Marbury in Beijing. You have a culture it's just really difficult to overstate in terms of basketball in China that is just insane. I mean, it's like it gets to the point now where all my old punching bags, Jason Whitlock and Clay Travis, come back in, where this summer Jason Whitlock made the claim that in response to Clay Travis saying Black Lives Matter being written on the court, will be written on the court before the NBA bubble started. He goes, Jason Whitlock says, this speaks to how unimportant the American market is to the NBA. Everything the NBA does, in my view, is to help its relationship with China. How does it help Nike's relationship with China and all these slogans? He goes, it'll be somewhere on the back of the basket, something about China. It's all a little anti-American sentiment that they're lacing into the NBA, because that's what communist-run China prefers. It's a form of propaganda against America that has been the tradition of communist countries for more than a century. It's how they have always smeared the West. We're racist. Meanwhile, they're the real racists. They don't have a melting pot. They don't have the diversity we have. I mean, I just can't even go on anymore. But, I mean, I don't know if you want to react there. It's so astounding. And this guy is a black man in America who, kind of built his career, kind of talking about racial issues, and then now is still operating on a platform. And so it's China, right, that has all the problems that, we're not racist here, right? And they're pushing anti-American propaganda. I mean, it's remarkable, quite frankly, and dystopian.
Yeah, well, a few things. First of all, I didn't know that there was a museum to Stephon Marbury in China. That's pretty amazing. I was looking it up. I saw the Undefeated actually did something about it not long ago. And yeah, with Jason Whitlock, showing off his own ignorance there. China is a diverse place with different ethnicities and religions and cultural practices. Many of them ancient, going back, thousands of years. And to call someone Chinese, that's not a commentary on their race or their ethnicity. That's a national marker, same as in being an American. But I mean, just sort of showing, I think, a kind of typical ignorance and an American exceptionalist attitude towards China. I mean, to suggest that this massive, multi-billion-dollar American industry in the U.S. is somehow like a proxy for the Chinese Communist Party, I think is beyond absurd. But I mean, this is what we can expect by someone like Jason Whitlock, who has carved out a niche for himself as sort of the chief black right-wing sports commentator in this country. But I think there's a direct connection to that to me, Nate, and how I forgot which player you said talked about his experience getting a COVID-19 case. I mean, that is a test, rather. That is such a completely different experience than people have here in the United States, where we don't really have mass testing, nor is it as aggressive as we see in China and other countries. And now what everyone looking to is a vaccine that's supposed to be coming from Pfizer. And certainly, I think a lot of people will be happy that a vaccine is at least on the horizon. I mean, I think it may take a little time for it to become widely available. But when you look at a massive pharmaceutical company like Pfizer, which has a history of price gouging on important drugs and treatments like for AIDS and things like that. I mean, I encourage people to look this up. And, in a capitalist system like we have in the United States, where people's health is put towards, the whims and interests of corporate profit instead of just, giving people medicine because it will help them live and not die. I mean, it's just such a big difference there, I think. And what it makes me wonder about, Nate, is, the relationship between the NBA and China at this point. I mean, there was a serious issue not that long ago around some basketball officials, tweeting out support of, of the so-called democracy movement in Hong Kong, and that having a negative impact on the NBA's relationship with China. It seems the NBA may be trying to mend that relationship as of now. And I was just sort of hoping you could break down what's happening with that relationship around this time.
Yeah, no, I think the NBA stood pat, and I think it's a credit to them. Actually, I think it's on. I want to, constantly, every chance I get, give a credit to LeBron James for standing his ground. I don't care what his reasons are. People want to point out that he's just doing it to make his own bottom line better. But I like when he says that people in the U.S. always want to project what's going on, and but in other places, and we have a lot of problems in our own house. And what you're referring to is former Houston Rocket and now Philadelphia 76ers general manager Daryl Morey, who Danny Heifel claims he's pretty confident that somebody kind of got to him, that he has connections with people kind of within the NGO kind of apparatus, and sort of likes to present himself in the kind of the woke human rights sort of I would sort of make an analogy to Ken Roth. I think it was the worst, in that sort of industry from Human Rights Watch. And yeah, it was all about just support for, pro-democracy movement. We all, the people who listen to the show, just how that term is just so badly exploited and misunderstood. But the NBA has their growth just continues to accelerate. You have the CBA, the Chinese Basketball Association, and they don't really compete with each other. They complement each other. And that sort of gets at, but the reality is too, that it's not just right-winger type people like Jason Whitlock. It's liberal media people that present themselves as, having woke views on Black Lives Matter and other issues, like Max Kellerman on ESPN, who's just had, ridiculous criticisms of LeBron James. So while sure, Whitlock is absurd and, highlighting that kind of easy to just sort of, point out, for what it is, it's a little more challenging when you look at the liberal media who likes that will stray away from those sort of that kind of extreme rhetoric maybe. But yet, especially in this age of new tech censorship, the Biden administration coming in and the kind of people they're putting in charge of, they want to talk about China, right, and censorship. But I know that there's lots of worry around, the gray zone and other independent media in this country, that there's going to be a concerted effort under a Biden administration to push back on the voices of the left, the voices of progressive media under the name of fighting disinformation. And I just find that tremendously, hilariously ironic, really, given all the focus on China and their authoritarian crackdowns, when China really just realizes that these American Silicon Valley companies are not just coming in to operate, but also to collect intel and stuff. So there's never like a neutral analysis you can find typically. That's why it's so important that the kind of conversations you're having on your show. And I think even the NBA, even if it's for self-interested reasons, has cultivating that market. Sometimes things happen for strange reasons. And I think that basketball diplomacy really can become a thing. It already is in action. I think it's something that we need to kind of stay focused on a little more, especially as the Cold War rhetoric just, will continue to heat up in a Biden administration. As we know, there won't be that much change from Trump.
Definitely. I mean, I think if anything, if the campaign itself is any indication, the Biden administration may actually be to the right of Trump on China. But we'll have to see on that point. But we thank you so much, as always, Nate, for joining us today. We're going to leave it there and move to a break here on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. But we will be back. So please stay with us.
By any means necessary.